Ya lo hace. Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! ¡Golazo!
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. Live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
And good day, good night. Welcome to Soccer Today for December 15th, 2017. 10 days till Santa comes. And yeah, it's Friday, so we thank Grant us for our beautiful Friday as always. But Duane, how have you been?
I'm kicking around. I'm getting out there. I'm having a good time. It's still MLS Cup hangover. Away we go.
How many weeks will that hangover last? That's the question. It's the holiday season. It's the MLS off season. Drafts galore. We had the expansion draft on Tuesday. There's the re-entry draft round one today, and there's always award season as well during this time of year. It usually starts with Player of the Year in Canada and the United States. We've talked on Wednesday a bit about who our choice would be, and a few hours after the show, well, turns out we were pretty damn right once again. For the sixth time in Canadian history, Atiba Hutchinson, Male Player of the Year.
There's really, as I said yesterday or on Wednesday, he was my vote, my first place vote, and there really isn't another choice. In fact, you can make an argument that Atiba Hutchinson deserves to be in the conversation at the very least. When you get to the overall Canadian Athlete of the Year. Now, I don't think that he's there for that, but nonetheless, I think that his accomplishments deserve to be recognized in that way. Look, who would be second? I mean, I voted for Arfield, but there's maybe Davies because of Gold Cup stuff. It's really not close.
But he doesn't play the club side, so it's hard to. You can use his exploits with the national team, but when you extrapolate on a 12-month period, there's other players that surpassed him. So it's kind of hard to use just the Gold Cup for Alphonso Davies. You're right about Atiba Hutchinson and the lack of maybe other choice at his level, but it's kind of when you captain your team in the Champions League, you play for the national teams. It's quite an accomplishment, and Atiba Hutchinson deserves it. And it's not just because there's nobody else. And I don't want this to take away anything from Atiba's award because he totally deserves it.
No, for sure. He absolutely does. And I mean, look, there are some players out there that you can talk about. Borjan as well, I think, would be another name you could throw into that mix, but it's really the club side of things, as you said. I mean, he didn't really have any sort of national team play this year, and that's always an interesting debate that I think of in my mind when I'm making this vote each year. Is that how much do you weigh national team duty versus club duty? And I kind of go 2/3 club, 1/3 national team is kind of how I think about it, and I flip that when I get to the women's side because the club game just isn't as established in the women's side, so the national team play I think matters a little bit more. So,
but on the Canadian women's side, I guess a club did weigh in the balance because Khadijah Buchanan won the Female Player of the Year, and her exploit in 2017 was to win the Champions League with Lyon, and that is probably her biggest trophy win in her career so far, and it's on the club side, and that probably weighed a lot in the decision to give her the Player of the Year. U20, by the way, is Jessie Fleming, but outright Female Player of the Year for the Canadian Soccer Association is Khadijah Buchanan.
No, and that was my vote as well. And again, I sort of contradicting myself here. In her particular case, it was that Champions League win that made me tip the balance. I voted Fleming too on that side, and Sinclair third. But and I'm glad to see on the women's side that they're starting to recognize in this country that there's a little more informed vote out there. That in the past it was just always people just write Sinclair, and in a lot of years she deserved it for sure. But it was just such a default vote for a long time, and there was a few years where she won, where she probably wasn't the best player.
Like 2011, 2011 is a bad example because it was a World Cup year, but those dark ages like 2012, 2013, when it's right smack in the middle of a World Cup cycle. And there's not a lot of games being played, and there's just a few performances that you can choose to elect your Player of the Year. And you're right, at some point it was Christine Sinclair, not by want, not the fact that she didn't deserve it, but there was maybe other players that deserved it, but because of the two most famous words in the English dictionary, default, she was getting that vote.
No, for sure. And I mean, like I said, I don't want to take anything away from Christine Sinclair's great career. Obviously, she is the greatest Canadian female soccer player that's ever, laced the boots for sure. But at the end of the run there, when she did the last few that she won, there were years I voted Sophie Schmidt one year, I voted for Dinah Matheson one year. Like, there were better performances overall. But to get back to Buchanan, obviously, sort of the up and comer, the next star that we saw break out at the World Cup, and a well-deserved award for her there, 100%. And as I said, I voted for her, so clearly I'm going to support the overall decision as well.
And on the men's side, but in the United States, sorry about my voice here, it got a little bit too croonery. But, in the United States, Christian Pulisic was named Player of the Year. And when you look at his exploits, playing in the Champions League for Borussia Dortmund, playing with the national team, scoring important goals, not important enough and maybe not enough goals, which explain why he didn't qualify for the World Cup. But in this difficult year where the U.S. didn't qualify for the World Cup, to elect or to give an award to your best player of the year, you have to take into consideration a lot more the club than the country. And I imagine players like Altidore, it didn't help them to win that award. The fact that with their shortcomings with the national team, when I say their shortcoming, it's not a personal one, it's a roster one. The shortcoming falls on every one of those players, not one pair of shoulders. But I do feel that did negatively affect the voting for Pulisic to run away with it.
Pulisic is a no-brainer, really. I mean, he was the best player both at club level and at country level. He's a game changer and a true star that they do have in that program now. It would have been hilarious had Josie or Bradley won, and I think they might be the only other two that you could really put in that mix. Our American listeners probably aren't going to like that, but you look at what they did with TFC and their overall body of work, and they're probably in that conversation. But Pulisic is head and shoulders above everyone right now, and a great player for the future. It's unfortunate that he's going to have to wait 4 years to go play in a World Cup, but
at least 4 years. At least 4 years. Could be worse. But that's the other thing we didn't talk about. Last week, speaking of 2022 and 4 years, there was more rumor saying, look, people are really getting impatient with Qatar and the delay in the stadium and the lack of security in the actual construction of the stadium and the thousands of workers that have been killed in duty constructing those big future white elephants. Well, there was a rumor or there was a conversation. Look, maybe we can just give the United 2026-2022 and postpone Qatar for 4 years to give them 4 more years to get their act together. It's a rumor. There's a very, very small probability that it happens, but it could happen.
I'll believe that when I see it. I mean, look, the whole Qatar thing is a mess that we all know about, but there's a lot going on there for sure. And I can't imagine FIFA, they're going to play in Russia next year. And if you listen to Five Rings yesterday,
you have to. If you didn't, you have to. Come on. This was maybe the most important show that Duane and I ever did.
Exactly. If you don't know, we talked about, basically the Russian doping and the
Russian government.
Anyway, listen, Five Rings.
A lot of things.
But if FIFA's willing to go there and willing to keep a banned guy on as the head of the World Cup committee, then I can't imagine they're going to pull out of Qatar. And look, it's a mess. Anyway, I don't know what more to say about that. It's just a mess.
No, it is a mess. It is a difficult mess. Let's just talk about a mess again, which is for me the re-entry draft. It's a mess. Every year there's 1 or 2 or 3 players that comes in. Thing is, what is the re-entry draft, Wayne? So we'll do every year we do our little re-entry draft 101, and it's now. Re-entry draft is for the players that rights are still owned by an MLS team that either the option has been declined by the team, by the player, or out of contract. They have the re-entry draft, which they can be the first round of the re-entry draft, which they can be picked by any team in Major League Soccer, and they keep that salary with an option if it's out of contract, but it's the same salary, same type of contract that they had before. Now, next week there'll be the re-entry draft, or round 2 of the re-entry draft, which if you pick up a player at that moment, you only carry 50% of his salary into your salary cap, and makes a big difference when you build your roster. But today, it's the full re-entry draft with the full salary of the player that you pick.
Yeah, and there's 2 rounds to this, as Kevin just said, and normally in this first round, you'll see maybe 2 or 3 players go. Largely speaking, most of these guys are on the list because they're not wanted at the club anymore, or the club feels that they're overpaid and want to renegotiate to a lower salary for them moving forward. That's the other thing you'll see. There's a lot of players on this list, and today they'll go through this process, and most of them will not be picked today, and that will allow the teams that they're currently with that next week to renegotiate something. You'll see a lot of them drop off in that, in the middle week there. You see them there today. So just don't assume because a guy's on there that he's gone for sure.
No, half of them won't be back. But there's one thing about this year, and I don't understand why yet, and I've asked questions, and capologist or cap expert haven't come back to me with the answer yet. So I'm going to ask it here. Duane, you have Patrice Bernier and Asun Kumara that both announced their retirement from Montreal. Both are ready to draft. They were in the unprotected area of the expansion draft last week, and they are in the re-entry draft. I kind of don't understand. Other retiring players in the league are not in that conversation. They're not in the draft. They weren't unprotected, but because they're retired, so they're just like part of the homegrown list. Being the name, we know the name, it's there, but you can't pick him because they're retiring. I don't understand what is making Montreal, like what financial incentive behind the scene, or maybe contract clauses, whatever the case may be, that makes Montreal put retired players on the unprotected list, which makes sense, but doesn't at the same time, and on the re-entry draft.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure either. I have seen it in the past where there have been other players that had retired and were also on the list. So I guess it's probably something to do with just, legalism or whatever. It's like
I think it has to do with the fact that their technical contract is up to the end of this year, right? So maybe after that contract is over, you can actually put him in the right place in your roster or retiring papers or whatever. But yeah, it does seem kind of weird for now.
Well, the other thing too is that the way MLS works, that as absurd as this sounds, if teams today or next week were to select Patrice Bernier, for instance, they would then have his rights if he decided to come out of retirement. Now, that's not going to happen, but that is probably part of this too, is it's about rights holding.
Or you select him and you get him as a coach because he's going to transition to a coach. Or you select him and you get his rights to be a coach. Maybe that's the thing.
Yeah, maybe. So. I mean, if for those that aren't, weren't around when this thing got invented, it really is. It used to be when these players that you're looking at in these lists that had their option declined or out of contract, it used to be that the clubs would sort of have them hostage. They couldn't sign anywhere else in Major League Soccer. This at least allows some degree of them to move if they're wanted elsewhere. And there were issues in the past where there were players that clearly could have played for other teams in MLS that just the team that had them before just kind of let them rot. And that was unfair, obviously. And then this was the mechanism they came up with to sort of address that. It's kind of a half measure, but I guess it works, and it's kind of part of the furniture now. It's just another draft. Welcome to draft season.
There's exactly. Welcome to draft season. But for me, there's a few names that are on there that just tells me how far they have fallen over the last 2 years. And that will bring you back to 2015 in the playoffs, Montreal versus Columbus Crew. Remember who was given a hard time to Didier Drogba back then? Like one defender who was physical, was big, was strong, was able to scare off attackers. Whatever happened to Gaston Sarro from Columbus? He's on the re-entry draft today. Whatever happened to Lloyd Sam? I guess we now understand why the Red Bulls quit on him a few years ago. Now on the re-entry draft. Probably going to re-sign with DC United, maybe with a smaller contract. Same for Gaston Sarro. But that's the type of players you'll find on this list. Names that are familiar. Names that had some maybe moments of quality in Major League Soccer. But consistency is lacking. And it's one of the reasons why you find them on this list as well.
Well, bad contracts. That's generally what you're finding on this list. And that's why so few of them go in the first round, because generally speaking, if a player is of a decent quality that he'd attract interest elsewhere, he's paid accordingly. If he's overpaid, they're going to want to wait for the next week so they can get them at the lower number. The one name that does jump out to to a lot of people up here is Matthias Laba. That's an interesting possibility there, and I wouldn't be surprised if he were to go in this first round. But like I said, you have to watch this thing shake out over the full 2 weeks before you can really make any predictions.
All right. Speaking of letting things play out, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk a bit more about Laurent Simon and the other weird moves that's happening in Montreal.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerTodaySPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.
And we're back. Soccer Today, Duane Rollins with myself, Kevin Laramee. It was a shock. They didn't sleep all night, according to Laurent Simon's agent, when the trade was made and he was told he was going to LA. He had difficulty grasping the news, and it's a difficult pill to swallow when you're from Europe, Duane, and you're not necessarily used to trades, and you're not necessarily used to not deciding where you're going, and especially when you just built yourself a house in the city you thought you would finish your MLS career in.
Yeah, and look, there's obviously the situation with his daughter as well.
Autistic daughter, Nina, who was in a special education class here in Montreal. Montreal has some great programs for autistic kid, and that was one of the reasons why he chose Montreal. Now he has a month to find the same amenities in LA.
And he's it's a French speaking family too. So I mean, it's a bad situation for him, and you can understand the frustration. Doesn't look particularly good on the Impact right now either with him speaking out. But as you said, when we talked about the original trade 2 days ago, maybe the fact that he's so outspoken played a role in him moving. Look, I have trouble sort of wrapping my head around trades sometimes. I mean, I get it from the fan sort of fantasy. It's kind of fun in that way, but we're talking about human beings here with human lives, and being uprooted like that with a month, as you said, to figure things out. That's, you can understand that it'd be pretty. You can imagine you go into work and they go, oh, by the way, you have to go to Cleveland tomorrow, and live there.
No,
it's a bit absurd.
I'm not going to Cleveland. What do you want me to do there? Like, jeez. But at least it's LA, beaches and brand new coach, and you're going to play with Claudio Vela. You're going to play with Diego Rossi, youngest DP ever, signed by LAFC this week as well. And there's a rumor there's a third DP that's going to be signed in the next few hours. You're being coached by Bob Bradley, and that was one important thing in the article of ESPN, which is the reasoning behind this conversation here. It's Laurent Simon's agent that talked to 91.9 Sports last night and other Montreal media. 91.9 Sports. That's where you can listen to Olivier Brett, our guest of Wednesday as well. It was during his show that led to this article by ESPN. But I do feel, Duane, in this situation alone, sporting-wise, soccer-wise, I think it's beneficial for both. Because for Laurent Simon to play for a coach like Bob Bradley, who is highly motivated to have a great beginning of his second career in Major League Soccer, who is motivated by the fact that he has some money, some backing, some big supporters behind him as well. AFC comes into the league trying to repeat what Atlanta did this year. So you have that backing, and there's a challenge that Bob Bradley apparently told Laurent Simon already. Like, Lolo, how about you find the form you had in 2015, and I challenge you to be Defender of the Year once again.
No, and for sure. And I think if you look at Simon's weakness, he's not great in the air, right? That's kind of where he struggles. But they got Walker Zimmerman beside him now. There's another move they made, and you got a 6'3" tree that's playing alongside.
That's a pretty decent back line. That's a pretty decent center back line.
Yeah, they're going to need to find the wide players. I mean, they look pretty good already. It's coming together already, and I think it's going to be a good launch and a similar to Atlanta launch that they have with this, because already the moves that they're doing look pretty good. But to get back to Simon, in the end, I think he'll settle into this if he can figure the family situation out, and it'll probably well be a good situation for him. But just unfortunate that it went down the way it is, and you got to feel for him, especially with the family situation.
Well, the thing is there's ways to do stuff. as a club, there's the normal way to do stuff. There's the very classy way to do stuff. And then there's the unclassy way to do stuff. Or the very, negative way to do stuff. I'm not saying the Impact did it in a negative way, no. But they didn't do it as much as the fans would have liked because Laurent Cimar's a cult hero for the club. Just because he's that type of player, the fact that he's outspoken, that created a very endearing relationship with the supporters because of his outspokenness in social media and his character. His demeanor is attracting. You fall in love watching him play because of the hard work and everything he puts in his soccer game. He becomes a fan favorite. It has been the case everywhere he played. He's still revered by fans of the Standard de Liège in Belgium. So he has that about him. Knowing this, you kind of have to, you know where you want to bring him. You know you don't want to bring him back, and you know you want to trade him. But you kind of have to give the the optics, the perception that you're doing everything you can to give him full, a classy departure. And I think just the fact that the conversation was made with his agent, and his agent mentioned the trade to Laurent Simard, is speaking about a lot of different things. The relationship between Simard and the management, we don't know where it was at that moment, but it doesn't seem like it was that good if that conversation happened with the agent as the intermediary. And as well, how difficult is it to, we're going to trade him. He's done, but here's his last press conference in Montreal where the fans can listen to him talk, and he has a chance to maybe have that tribune for him and not having to do it as himself on his social media with a letter that he wrote last night. And I think those are little differences that would have appeased maybe the fans a bit more with the treatment of this fan favorite. Is, you might not change the fact that you're going to trade him, but you can package it a little bit better.
No, for sure. On the optics side of thing, on the fan side of thing, you're absolutely right. The other thing too is you have to be careful about your reputation with players and how you deal with players. And I'm not saying that the Impact are doing this universally because I don't know, but
it's already not that great.
I do know back in the day that the TFC had a reputation that they just treated people like they were, nothing basically, and it just bit them in the butt, right? Just giving them a call, giving them a heads up, say, look. We're not going to bring you back, and this is why. So, we want to make sure that you understand that this is happening, and this is likely where you're going to go. That would have given him the opportunity to sort of try and settle his life a little bit more. They still have the right to trade him, obviously, and they're still going to, but giving him a heads up, not having him find out the way he did, probably would have been the better way to go. But who knows all the dynamics that are going there? None of us are in the room, right?
Exactly. But at least on the other side, if you're a fan of the Montreal Impact and you're looking at your team for next year or the next few years ahead, at least Montreal didn't lose a player once again for nothing. It's one of those few instances of the last few years where Montreal is losing a player, but for something. For Raheem Edwards, for Jacaraitala. I'm not going to spell it right now. I need a few weeks to learn how to spell it correctly. But those two players, you got something for Laurent Simard. We're not going to get anything for Bernardello. Fine. 12 balls would have been enough, but we're not going to get anything. Romero's option declined. The amount of players that left Montreal over the last 5 years, without getting anything from them, it's a lot. And you see that loss over and over and over again because you never make gains with your roster. You make gains, but you lose them and you have to start from scratch. When you trade a player, let a player go, but find a way to get allocation or money or a transfer or at least players if it's a trade, you get something out of that trade. You get something out of the departure of that player that you can continue the gains that you made in your roster. You can continue the betterment of your players. Everything else continues to grow. You don't start from scratch. And for once, Montreal got something for a departing player.
No, for sure. And that's always the question you have to ask yourself, well, whether you want to hold on to a guy in his last year or whether you want to try and get something, as you say, for them. And it's a difficult decision sometimes to make. In Montreal's case right now, I think they're probably objectively looking at their lineup and thinking that this is probably going to be a couple of years before they're contending for a championship again and making the decision at that point to cash in. If they thought they were closer, they probably would have held on to some of these guys a little bit longer. That's sort of all the difficult decisions that people above my pay grade have to make all the time, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. And speaking of decision above our pay grades, another decision we would have made, we would have gone a different way. But let's just go back in our timeline. About 2 weeks ago, Caleb Porter leaves Portland. And we were in the same week where MDS was announcing, like Delta's done, San Francisco's done, and I have a new place, I have a new job lined up. But then there's an MLS spot opens, and everything else becomes quiet. And in the words of Mark Dos Santos himself, look, I had a choice made, but I decided to back off a second and to reassess all my options, which meant that he wanted the Portland job. But at the end of the day, it is a former NASL coach who is getting the job. But once again, it's not Mr. Mark Dos Santos, but this time around, Gio Savarese, formerly of the New York Cosmos, is supposed to be the next Portland Timbers head coach.
In many ways, it's unfair, but this is going to be a test for sort of promoting Division II coaches up to MLS ranks. If he is successful in Portland, I think it will open doors for other clubs to follow suit, and ultimately will be good for MDS. But it's been coming. Portland's always sort of taken things. They've been willing to take risks with people, even when they bought in Porter. He was coming from sort of a different situation than many managers come in. So
he was coming from the U23 U.S. men's national team side, just coming off of Akron as well. So.
Yeah, the Akron stuff would have been a big part of his resume at that point for sure. But yeah, look, it's a good hire. I think it's an interesting hire, and again, it's not completely fair, but if people are going to look at his success or failure and determine whether that's universally going to be something that allows other D2 coaches to get, as I said, promoted. And there's been a lot of people clamoring for that for a while. The coaching fraternity sort of suggests that they don't get a chance to get those moves up. You get labeled as a D2 coach and you don't get an opportunity to test yourself above. So as I said, this could actually be good news for Dos Santos, although he needs to find a job for next year.
He does. I'm not worried for Mark because there's always going to be a chance if he wants to go back. There's going to be offers from the USL. That's for sure. He's three straight finals, different leagues, but 3 straight finals, won 1 of 3. And I do feel like there's a chance we're going to see Mark Dos Santos still at a high level. There's going to be other opportunities maybe in early next season. You never know. We can see another Mike Pepke happen next year in Major League Soccer. And sometimes if you're a coach without contract at the beginning of Major League Soccer, it could be beneficial. You take a few months break. You spend time with your family, which he hasn't been able to living in San Francisco last year. And before that, it was in Kansas City region. So maybe if you're Mark Dos Santos, you take a few months off and you wait and see what happens in March and April in Major League Soccer. Maybe there's a team that's going to struggle. Maybe there's a team who gets rid of their coach. And then you become a favorite to get that job once again because you're in the loop. Maybe you take a analyst job. Maybe you go work for, I don't know, a TSN or RDS or an American equivalent to get yourself in the conversation still and to be visible. But maybe that's the way to go for Mark Dos Santos. Take a few months off, stay home with the family, enjoy time with your brother, and prepare your because they're amazing coaches in a way that they're always preparing for their next move, right? They have like philosophies and ways they want to do stuff even without having a club. So I wouldn't be surprised if for months and months, Mark and Philip Dos Santos just devise a strategy in their dark room. And eventually when they get the chance to get into an MLS team or a first division team somewhere in the world, they'll use it.
That is an interesting sort of thought there, that he might choose to not start the season without a contract. It's a bit risky, obviously, but as you say, though, this is a guy with a great track record of success at the level that we're talking about. So at the very worst, I don't think he'll struggle to eventually find a job back at that level again because he's won everywhere he goes. So why wouldn't you want to hire him if you had the opportunity to?
Exactly. Now we're gonna enjoy the weekend of Premier League. We didn't do a games of the week. There's a lot of games. You can watch them all. You can follow our Twitter feed as well. But it's the start of this holiday season. We had a Premier League game this week. There's some in the weekend. There's some next weekend. A lot of English footy for the next few weeks, right?
Absolutely. It's the most wonderful time of year.
It's the most wonderful time of the year, especially when I'm not singing. All right, Duane, you can be followed. Did you know that your Twitter account is at 24th Minute, and people can follow you there?
Yeah. I've heard that.
You heard that, right? About 7,000 people heard that too. And you can follow me to maybe catch up to Duane with the 7,000 kind of like 1300. So not put it too loud, but you can follow me too at Kev Laramee. And as always, until Monday morning, 10 a.m., live on YouTube, on demand, on iTunes, Stitcher, Feedburner, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get your podcast. You can find Soccer Today. And until then, have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.